Sports is about winning. Seeding is about rankings.
They're now up to 2-2, but most importantly, 1-1 in league play.
From football to basketball, volleyball to wrestling, track and field, baseball, soccer, golf, and softball.
I could see him dropping 15 or 16 to avoid league matchups.
Blecha-tology does the math so you don't have to.
I look at them and I say, if things go right for them this year, they're going to stay.
Now, the master of mathematics, Ben Blecha.
Well, as we head into a new football season, we see some new faces in some new places. As we turn to football Blecha-tology, let's talk 8-man and 1A football. There are a lot of changes in these leagues, and it's really, I think, very interesting for us to be able to follow along with. The biggest news is that Stratton, who for many a year were in the 6-man football ranks, they're back up to the 8-man ranks where they had a ton of success 20 years ago, a perennial power inside the Plains Conference. Stratton is now an 8-man football team. They weren't mathematically quite there coming into this season, but knowing that the count is coming, the folks in the Stratton School District decided that this was the time to make the move up to 8-man football. That, coupled with Dayspring Christian, who is a perennial part of the Plains Conference. It's now known as League D for CHSAA. I'm sure they'll probably allow them to change it back to the Plains Conference. But Dayspring Christian was one of the schools that was hit by the private school enrollment account. You have to count 150% of your enrollment. So Dayspring Christian is now an 11-man Class 1A football team. So you would think that would be a simple switch, right? Just drop Stratton in where Dayspring Christian left. Well, a couple other changes in a couple other leagues had kind of necessitated a few other shifts there. Clear Creek and the Gold Diggers will now be a part of the 8-man League D. So the Plains Conference in 8-man football coming into the 2026-28 cycle will now span from Idaho Springs to Stratton to Julesburg. That's the triangulation of the Plains Conference for the Colorado High School Activities Association. It is a massive league, and it's a league in 8-man football full of some incredible talent. Of course, in the 8-man football league, you have the defending state champions and the Haxton Bulldogs. You have the defending runners-up in the Akron Rams, and you have the 6-man football runners-up in Stratton. You couple that with Sedgwick County, who was also in the playoffs last season. Marino was very close, and Clear Creek was in the playoffs last year. This is a, on paper, absolutely rugged league. Now, I talk about it all the time on Blecha-tology. The champs are the champs until the champs get beat. And I will tell you in any polls that I vote in, Haxton as the champs will be number one until they sustain a loss, because I am a firm believer that the champs are the champs until the champs get beat. And I think that's the way it should be coming into a new season. I know that there's mathematical formulas and all these other pieces with the Max Preps rankings, the old seating and selection index data that obviously would not adhere to that policy, but I will always adhere to that policy. That being said, the champs, they're doing more than reloading. 3% of their offensive production is all they have coming back this season. 17% of their defensive production, that's all that's coming back this season, and 5% of their special teams production. When you mathematically put it all together, and you have to remember, once again, we are talking inside Blecha-tology completely about numbers. We're talking about how things are working based on numbers, not based on what we have. But you're only bringing back 9% of your roster and 2.8 points per game. The task in front of the Haxton Bulldogs is tall. And then you couple the fact that longtime head coach J.D. Stone retired after last year. It is basically all new faces for the Haxton Bulldogs this season. And the same can be said for the runners-up in the Akron Rams. Now, keep in mind, Akron was number 3 in the Max Preps rankings at the end of last year. That will be the rankings going forward. We will not be seeing any seeding and selection index data So Akron, looking at them as the number 3, but this team with the loss of Colton Randall, their quarterback, he's now down at McClave, who was the 2 in the Max Preps rankings. I think McClave, in the 8-man standpoint, on paper, has all the tools to be the prohibitive favorites in 8-man football this season. Akron, meanwhile, now you have to replace 85% of your offense. Now you've got to replace 69% of your defense. Now you've got to replace 82% of your special teams. You only have 22% of your production last year and not even 2 touchdowns a game back. Both teams that were in the 8-man title game last year on paper have a lot to work with. They have a very tall task to work with as they come into this new season. And then you bring in Stratton. You couple in the Stratton team that is, the team that has been in 8-man football. They're coached by a team guys that played the last time they were 8-man. They're not going into something unfamiliar. They are not unfamiliar with 8-man football. The guys may not have played it recently, but they know what they're doing. And you're bringing back 48% of your roster. You're bringing back 37 points a game. This team is bringing back some chunks. So you have the 3 teams kind of here that were semifinalists, finalists, runners-up, however you want to look at them last season, in very, very different situations this year. Stratton is going to surprise some people in 8-man football right out of the gate, just because I don't think a lot of people remember that entire coaching staff played 8-man football, and you have a bunch of guys that are back, including your leading rusher. I believe he was 6-man football's second leading rusher to Gabe Kechter last season in Fox. So Stratton, this is a great team. Then you add Sedgwick County into the mix. They bring back a good chunk, nearly 2/3 of their total production last season. They weren't a high-scoring team, but they were a very savvy defensive team. Chris Michael, very successful at Sedgwick County for many, many years. I think this is a top 8 team to start the season in 8-man football. Marino, their numbers weren't all that attractive last year. They were 19th in the final Max Preps rankings in that Plains Conference, but you're bringing back 71% of your total offense. You're bringing back 3/4 of your defense. Xavier Trinkle is one of the most underappreciated athletes in 8-man football. I think Marino could surprise some people, and we're excited to see them early in the season on the Eastern Plains Sports Networks. They take on West Grand, who's been a perennial postseason team in 8-man football in Marino on the 4th of September. And then let's not forget Clear Creek. This has been a playoff team the last couple of years, but they got hit hard by graduation on the offensive end. They graduated nearly 80% of their total offense. Half of their defense is gone. 2/3 of their production in the special teams is gone. There's a lot of guys that are going to have to do some new things for Clear Creek coming into the season, but you have a lot of guys that understood how to put the ball in the end zone last year for Clear Creek. That could buoy them early in the season. Haxton's going to be the number 1 until they're defeated in 8-man football, but their task is tall in front of them, and there's a lot of teams chasing them that I think can make the case. That's 8-man football. Now, how about 1A football? Typically, in 1A football, we only have to pay attention to the North Central League. That was the league that was Holyoke and Wiggins and Yuma and Ray and Burlington and Lyman. And like the Plains Conference in 8-man football, this was the league that was getting virtually the entire league into the postseason every single year because they were so rugged. Well, some changes. Obviously, Dayspring Christian coming up. Byers, who was an 8-man football team, they're now an 11-man football team because of count there. Bennett, who is in the Byers area, they dropped from 2A to 1A. You have a lot of new faces in the mix as to who needed to be where. So the old North Central League is now broken up. What was the North Central League is now League C and still features the Lower Platte teams in Wiggins and Yuma and Ray and Holyoke, although Wiggins is a Patriot League team in the non-football sports. Highland is now a part of this mix. Platte Valley, also a Patriot League team, they're part of the mix, and because Dayspring Christian is in that area, they are in the League C from the Colorado High School Activities Association in 11-man football. And this is a really interesting league because typically all of these teams are very, very strong, but all of these teams were hit hard. Platte Valley only brings back 5% of their offense. Ray only brings back 7% of their offense. Highland only brings back 11% of their offense. Dayspring Christian, coming up from 8-man, brings back 59% of their total production and 79% of their offense. But my question is, how does their transition from 8-man to 11-man work? We just talked about Stratton going from 6 to 8-man and their success. I think that transition from 6-man to 8-man upward is easier than the 8-man to 11-man transition because of the depth you need on the offensive line. I don't have the numbers to prove it just from what we've seen. It typically takes a couple of years for those 8-man teams to figure out the 11-man football. But you're now also looking at a program that many of these guys in the Greeley area probably have played some 11-man football growing up. What kind of experience they have. I know the guys on the coaching staff, some of them have experience in 11-man football, so that could, I think, help them a little bit coming into the mix. You have some of those big names that are hit by graduation, but then you have a team like Yuma, who is bringing back 78% of their offense. They did lose their leading top 2 tacklers, but offensively, everything's back for the Outlaws. You have a Wiggins team that went just 1-8 last season, failed to make the playoffs, but 85% of their offense is back. 65% of their total production is there. You've got all these guys back. The biggest thing that hampers Wiggins coming into this season is virtually everybody that scored for them last year graduated. So you've got guys with yardage, but maybe not guys that have finished things off before. So how does Wiggins respond? Same could be said for Holyoke. In the opposite fashion. They have more than 2 touchdowns a game returning this season, but only 81% of their offensive production is back. You're bringing back some good pieces, but you're not bringing back guys that maybe did the workhorse end of things. So there's a lot of questions to me in this Class 1A League C. I think if I were to say somebody's got to be the favorite, because there isn't a champ in this league, the champ is now in League E, even out of that North Central League, I think Yuma's probably the team that will take the forefront in 1A's League C. To me, they feel like the team that has the tools to be the leader in that mix. Can Dayspring Christian perform as an 11-man team? That's a question that on paper, yeah, they should. You've got 4 touchdowns a game back. But it's now 11-man football, so do they deserve that number 2 spot? I don't know. Does, Holyoke fall into that number 2 spot? Or are they number 3 or 4 or 5? I really think Dayspring, Holyoke, Wiggins, and Ray, because Ray graduated all of the success that they had rushing-wise, passing-wise last year. And I know they got a lot of experience in games they got up big in last season and made that wonderful run come postseason time. Ray is Ray, and they'll reload, but there's a lot of early questions. And looking at their schedule early on in the season, they got a lot of tough early games before you get to league play. So I don't really know behind Yuma. They feel like the number 1 to me. And so that's where I'm going to fall in League C. Now, the other 2 teams that were in that North Central League, Burlington and Lyman, are now in League E, which is kind of a mashup between the Union Pacific and the Black Forest. Lyman and Burlington, they were the 1-2 last year in the Max Preps rankings at the end of the season, regular season last year. Lyman was the 2, Burlington was the 4. Then you throw Byers into this mix. Byers is a part of that Union Pacific. They were the 11 seed in the 8-man bracket last season. You've got 3 really good Union Pacific teams that are jockeying for position in there. And you combine them with that Black Forest-ish, although Simla is an 8-man team, but that's kind of the league that you have here with Colorado Springs Christian, who was the 10 seed in the 1A bracket last season, Ellicott, who went 5-4. You have Bennett dropping down from 2A to 1A to make up League E, and Salida will still be a 2A team come postseason time, but they're playing a league schedule in the 1A League E. Burlington to Salida. You want to talk about the 8-man massiveness of that Plains Conference. Clear Creek to Sedgwick County or Stratton. Burlington to Salida is like a 5-hour trip for a league game. So that's going to be a massive one. But Burlington to anywhere is a long trip. We all know that. That's kind of been the one that's there as well. I really think Burlington and Lyman are the favorites to start things in this League C, because Burlington brings back nearly 2/3 of their offensive production. Not that they threw the ball a lot last year, but they didn't graduate any of their passing. They bring back 230 rushing yards per game. You had injuries last season that should afford quarterback Scout Humrick to now move back to running back, which is his more natural position, to fill the void with what you graduated. You still have Weston Shaw as the quarterback, who was supposed to be the quarterback but got injured last year. He was a very talented quarterback in that mix, and both are very good defensively. You bring back 2/3 of the total production from last season. Burlington wasn't a very high-scoring team, but better than 2 touchdowns a game, to me, really feels like they've got things on tap. Lyman, on the other hand, I'm going to make them the preseason number 2 in this League E because they're Lyman, because of the name across the front of their jersey, because of the helmet that they wear, because of the history of one of the most storied football programs in the entire state of Colorado. But you're graduating nearly 3/5 of your total production from last season, including better than 150 rushing yards a game. How does that play into the factor with Lyman? They again weren't a very high scoring team, but Lyman's Lyman, and until Lyman proves me otherwise, they deserve to be the team that is in the conversation in this League E and still feels like a team that deservedly is a top 10, potentially a top 5 across the state. Behind that, my question is Byers going from 8-man to 11-man. They were 11-man much more recently than Dayspring Christian, who's never been 11-man, is. So I think the transition might be a little bit easier for them. They do bring back about 70% of their total production and most of their scoring, 35 points a game. So I think this transition for Byers probably puts them into that same top 3 mix in this League E, which is hard to say because Colorado Springs Christian, this is a team that's been very, very good, but when they played these top-tier teams, things have not gone their way. So when you're graduating 1/3 of your offense, when you're graduating 1/3 of your defense, when half your special teams is gone, who's going to fill some of those voids in those critical situations for Colorado Springs Christian? The good news is I think that they're going to really be able to battle and do some very good things. The top 4 in this League E, this might be the best Class 1A football league this season. Night in, night out, you're going to have 1 or 2 games every single week that are worth watching in this league. Ellicott's not a bad team, but they graduated quite a bit on the offensive end. Their defense is going to have to carry them early. Most of their scoring is gone. Bennett went 0 for 9 last year. I know dropping from 2A to 1A sometimes help teams, but they really, numbers-wise, didn't have a lot of production last year. So I don't know what to make of Bennett. Same with Salida, being a 2A team playing in a 1A league, but they only bring back 9% of their total offense from last season. There's a lot of questions for me as to how they fall there. We're not going to break down in 8-man football or 1A football or 2A, 3A football any of the full statewide. We're going to rather focus on our leagues and who is there, who's kind of some of those top teams until we get into the season and kind of have a feel for what everything is going to look at. So that's a look at the 8-man and the 1A football Blecha-tology. Make sure you're following along with us with the Eastern Plains Sports Network, because we'll be doing Blecha-tology all season long. I'm Ben Blecha.